Okay, so on today's tutorial, I'm going to do some icy waters and some sort of mountainous rocks. And I'm going to do them reflected in the water as well. So I've got a pre-selected colour palette here. There's not a wide range of colours, but there are quite a few different types of blues and greys. So it's a good idea to have a good range of different types of blue, even if it is just predominantly going to be monochrome. In terms of the brushes I'm using within Procreate, I'm going to largely use the airbrush. I use this for most of my tutorials, unless I have a very specific reason to use a textured brush, which is not very often, then I'll just stick to the soft airbrush, or maybe sometimes go to the sort of medium airbrushes as well. If I do change my brush to anything radically different, obviously I'll let you know in due course, but just assume that I'm going to be switching between the two. So to begin with, I'm going to start with the soft airbrush. In terms of the colours, I'm going to start on the top row, and these colour codes you can find in the description. You just need to make a note of the values, punch them into this area where it says hexadecimal code, press enter, and then you'll be able to piece together the same colour palette that I've used here. For those people that support me over at Patreon, one of the advantages of doing that is that there will be a downloadable file in which, it's there for you. You don't have to put it all in manually. If you want more information about my Patreon page, then again, there's a link for that in the description. So to begin with, I've selected the first blue. I'm on a soft airbrush. I'm going to turn the size of the brush up somewhere, as it happens, around the sort of 15%. I'm going to turn the opacity fairly low to begin with, and I'm just going to start putting in a band of blue tone at the top. And I'm quickly going to now use another type of blue, and just where the other one ended, I'm going to now blend it into that blue, and I'm quickly going to move through the different blues here so that we don't get too much of any one of them. Now, I've done quite a range so that you can obviously blend them in quite easily. But if you're not happy with the overall look, then you can easily go to the adjustments, Gaussian blur, and just turn it up slightly, and it's going to blend it in slightly better. And then if you feel like you've extended it too far, you can nudge it up or nudge it down, whichever you feel is appropriate. So I'm just going to stretch it down. In fact, I want it to have a greater transition area. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to select about half of it. So if I go onto the selection tool, choose the rectangle, extend it to about halfway. 3 fingers drag down will copy, and 3 finger drag down will paste. You could have just done the copy and paste in one action, but there you go. So I've just mirrored it there, saved a little bit of time. I'm showing you some of the shortcuts because, although you can do these things manually, sometimes you just want to get to grips with some of the later stages. So I'm just showing you a little bit of a shortcut for the earlier parts. I know later on it's going to be a little bit darker. So I'll go onto my hue, saturation and brightness and just turn the darkness of it up a nudge, and that's also give me a sense of where the horizon is going to go as well. On that horizon, and I will come back to some of the sky details in a bit, but on the horizon I'm going to create another layer for that. I'm going to go to my colours. I'm going to be using these colours here, so I'm going to choose the lightest blue, and I'm going to turn the size of my brush down. In fact, I think it might be better if I move to the medium airbrush. If I'm doing the top of the mountain range, then they're not going to be too soft. They're going to have a little bit of more of a solid outline. Maybe turn the opacity up to halfway or so. I'm just going to piece in some more distant blocks of mountains now. Now I'm going to stop around here because you're not going to see anything beyond that point anyway, because it's going to have larger things in the centre. Now, because I've got the opacity on a lower thing, I've just done one pass. I've not doubled over it like I did there, so therefore it's going to look slightly more distant. And then I can do something over the top to bring a section of it slightly more forward. I can then go to my colours again, pick a darker one. Maybe turn the opacity up this time, so it really is going to cut in front of the things that I've already done. I'm going to keep the horizon light quite flat on this. So I'm just going to move through the colours now. I'm going to start increasing the size of some of these features. In fact, I might turn the opacity up on this. I can add the texture. Sometimes I've noticed that by keeping it on a fairly low opacity, that you begin by adding texture in right from the start. Whereas because I'm overlaying some of these different features, I don't want them too translucent because you can literally see through them, and that's not going to work in this instance. I'm not too bothered about the bottom line here, just keep it roughly in line with the horizon. It's going to be an unusual kind of composition really, where it's all focused towards the centre. Now sometimes when I'm doing a landscape I might want to focus things more around the edges and then create more of a space in the center, whereas this is kind of the opposite. You're going to have more retreating space at the edges, but more of a really dominant feature in the center. I'm just going to keep moving along, have a darker color. There isn't going to be an absolute cutoff point for this because it's all part of the same rock, just that some bits of it are going to jut out a little bit more than others perhaps. It's okay to leave some broken texture too. That might be something that feeds into your image later on. I'm not going to bother with the reflection just yet. I'm going to work on the top half first, and then when I feel I've got a bit further with that, then I will work on maybe creating the reflection of it, and it would be much quicker to do it that way. I do have a darker color here, but I'm going to use that for some of the real shadows and sort of texture parts of the rocks. I feel like I might go back a little bit, backtrack a little bit, maybe create some features here that are in the middle distance a little bit more. So I'm going to what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to tidy up some of the edges. I just really want to start imagining where you might get some little outcrops, some bits that stick up. This is when you get to invent your own sort of mountain really, your own rock features. Some little spikes here and there that stick up, a little bit here that juts out. Again, another section that juts out. Maybe you could have a more dramatic spike at this point. Maybe it curves down, maybe another dramatic spike and so on. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my lightest blue now in this range, and I'm going to use that to start building in some texture into the more distant sort of mountain ranges. So I want to break up that kind of solid dark tone. Not too much, just a little bit here and there. Maybe a little bit here as well, although I'm going to use a slightly different colour palette on the left hand side, because I'm going to imagine the sun's coming more from this side. So I want to use a different colour scheme really than it's going to be on this right side. I'm going to create another layer, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to the blue tones at the top. So I'm going to use these were the colours for the sky, but I'm going to go for the third colour along, and I'm going to use this as a real bright blue that's going to help me add the snow onto this side of this mountain range. So I might just have some smaller patches of it near the top, and then it's almost like the snow has settled and sunken into a sweeping motion near the bottom. So it helps to think of it in terms of the way that it behaves, and that's going to really inform the way that you actually draw it. So imagine it's been at the top, but it's fallen down and it's settled more near the base of it a little bit. Again, keep it quite broken, maybe add it with a sense of the directionality of it. So maybe have it starting along points along here and then sweeping down. Again, keeping it broken. Now, if you feel like you want to go to a brighter white at this point, there might be some bits where the sunlight is hitting that side, but then it's just managing to creep around in certain areas, and you can use that bright white just to suggest that the sun is actually picking up on maybe some smaller sections at the bottom here as it creeps around. But I really wouldn't do too much of that at this side. It's just going to be smaller details and elements along here. And then perhaps as the snow creeps around onto this side and it's getting more direct sunlight at this point of view, then you can really concentrate on that white. Now, there's going to be less snow on this side because this is subject to a bit more sunlight perhaps. So maybe there's going to be some just settled on the top of some of the bits that jut out, and then again it's going to slide down. Maybe it's going to settle there at the bottom a little bit more, maybe it's not quite melted away down there. Some little points higher up again where the snow is still clinging on. So getting the amount of this and the right kind of shapes is the real challenge. Not something you can necessarily teach, not straight away, but I'm giving you the sort of demonstration, the suggestions of the types of areas that you could add light perhaps. I turn the size of the brush down, still on the medium airbrush. Add some little highlights to the top here. Again, the sun is coming from this direction, so it's maybe hitting it along that edge, and that's going to be the same as we go along to the other areas here too. Now I'm going to go back to the blue, and I'm just going to start feeding it into the white areas a little bit more. So I want them to really join up here and just feel like they have a connection to each other. Maybe just bring that blue down a little bit further in certain areas. So you need to make it obvious that that shape is the same substance, but it's subject to a different light condition. So you need to kind of tie them together a little bit more like that. Now I'm going to switch to one of my other colour ranges here. Now we've got more greys in this section, so I'm going to use that, and I'm going to hopefully get the idea across that there's sort of sun hitting it from over this side, and it's creating rather a different effect. So it's a warmer colour tone, and I'm just going to start piecing in some of those warmer colours on that side. So I'm going to chop and change between the different colours. Got 3 different types of grey here, and let's just see if we can create a little bit more variety. Now you'll notice that I'm producing this zoomed out. If I zoom in, you're going to lose the kind of sense of the illusion. Now I'm going to put more detailed tutorials on my Patreon page for my patrons. I'm going to stick to doing the overall effect on my YouTube channel, but if you're interested in more of the details, then I'm going to start putting more videos up on my Patreon page for people that want to push it a little bit further than I'm able to do on my YouTube. Now I'm a high school teacher, and for the last few months it's been really busy at work, and I've not produced as many videos as I would like to have produced. But now I'm on my summer holidays and I've got a little bit more time, and the intention is that I'm going to get more of these videos done over the next few weeks. One of the reasons I set up the YouTube channel was to just keep myself active as an artist, really. Initially, I find it's really good to get involved in some kind of community, keep your creativity going, get feedback from other people. And I'm glad to see that it's really encouraged other people to get involved and share their work as well at the same time. It's been really motivating for me to keep going creatively, but also the actual YouTube channel has really benefited from the feedback and the interactivity or the involvement that my subscribers have had with the channel. It's been really fantastic. Because I'm working full time, just here and there I find that I'm against my wishes having to neglect the channel a little bit at times, but I'm doing my best. Whenever I get more free time, I'm going to keep investing that time into this channel. I'm going to keep growing it. It's not going away, it's not going anywhere. What I recommend is that you subscribe, press the bell notification, and even when my uploads are a bit more hit and miss, so they're not on a constant basis, when I do upload them, the algorithm, YouTube's algorithm, is not going to prevent you from being notified at that point. One of the colours that I've just moved on to is one of the green colours. I want to present, especially on this side where there's less snow, it's getting more sunlight. Let's just pretend that it's getting sunlight on a more regular basis, and we're adding more greenery there because things are growing there. So I've got a variety of different greens here. You see I've got 3 different greens. I'm adding that green mainly on this side at the lower area, because you're not going to get much that grows up on the taller areas, but when you get more settlement of soil, perhaps it's going to have places where things can take root. So you're getting a bit more of those 3 different types of greens here. Maybe it's just going around the edge a little bit. So I've not really changed the opacity. I've got it on a maximum opacity. Sometimes I don't do that, sometimes I do. What I'm doing at the moment is I'm relying upon the pencil pressure. So sometimes I'm pressing on more than others, and sometimes I'm really releasing the pressure so it doesn't cover it as much. Now, if you're having a go at this particular tutorial and you're finding this one quite challenging, quite difficult, because I'll be honest, this is the kind of subject matter when you really get into the texture that I personally find quite challenging too. Now, one of the reasons I set myself the challenge of doing this type of painting on camera to explain it is so that I can get better at it myself. But if you are finding this quite challenging and you need something a bit simpler, then do look through my other videos, my playlists, my other landscape tutorials, because there's definitely some of them will be easier than this. But once you've had a go at some of those and you want to come back and you want to look at the way that I do it and you can incorporate some of my approach, then hopefully it will be of some assistance. But it's not always possible to give you an absolute step-by-step instruction on how to create every facet, every aspect of creating an image. I'm trying to give you the overall sense of it, but sometimes for the creating an illusion, you have to be able to look at how it's working. Maybe use a photograph reference. It's going to get you a little bit further. But at the same time, unless you're slavishly copying it, you need to be able to use your eye and recognize when an illusion is working or where perhaps it isn't working too. I'm not terribly happy with the difference between that side and the rest of it, so I feel like I need to just press on in fact, I'll go to my colors instead. I'll go to my darkest blue. Well, there is a dot of black, but I'm going to the next one along. I'm going to turn the opacity of that down somewhat on the brush up a little bit, and I just want to exaggerate perhaps the difference in this area, get rid of some of the greys there and really darken them up a little bit so that it feels now more of a difference between that side where the sunlight is hitting it and then the other aspects around the corner that are more in the shadow. I'm going to just concentrate some of that darkness really onto the forward or the front areas, and maybe just a little bit here and there as well over here, but I don't want to do dark colours as it recedes into the distance. Now I'm going to keep this colour and I'm going to start adding some broken bits in the snow as well. So I can zoom in a little bit more, not too much, but I'm generally now just going into it, adding some finer details, sense of broken texture in that snow. There will be ways, I suppose, of using a textured brush to create this effect, but I'd rather do it manually. That way you feel like you're really getting a sense of how to do this. And if you understand how to do it manually with a basic brush, then you can apply that understanding to any medium at that point. So whether it's digital, whether it's traditional paint, whether it's pencil drawing, if you can do it with a simple brush, then you can do it in any medium then in theory. Whereas if you're reliant upon textured brushes, then really you're kind of limited to digital in this instance. You don't want to teach things that are limiting people to a particular program. So I'm not pressing on as hard for this section. I'm breaking up the texture a little bit. I'm not pressing on as hard as I did here. So if I press on hard, I get a darker colour. Press on lightly, I get a lighter colour. So I'm just pressing on a bit more lightly to break up this snow. Maybe flip between the two so I can press on the actual snow colour. Create some sections perhaps where you get bands of that snow higher up. Okay, going to my dark grey. I say dark grey, it's not quite as dark as I would have imagined it to be. Perhaps I'll turn the opacity down so that when I'm adding it, it's having an influence, but it's not quite as light as I've got it selected. I'm going to have a sense that there's a sheer element to the rocks. That's an explanation why the snow just drops down maybe. So if you wanted to go to your lightest blue here, so it's not the white, it's the lightest blue. It's a good colour perhaps to start adding just some extra highlighted textures into this daylight half of the mountains, the rocks. There might be just some little bits of snow or bright bits of rocks that are reflecting the sunlight. It's going to be difficult to tell at this kind of distance, but it was looking a bit flat there, so I'm adding a little bit more. Now, if you've watched sort of Bob Ross paintings in the past, which I certainly have, then he'd have great techniques with the brushes that he used to be able to sort of roll and drag with the knives, to be able to sort of get the broken texture in there. Now, I'm not relying upon any kind of technique like that, so I'm doing it manually, and that's just the way that I prefer to work. Like I say, there's no right and wrong really, it's the best way to get to the effects that you're actually interested in. And if you enjoy one type of process and it gives you better results, then feel free to do that. You don't need to stick slavishly to the way that another artist actually works, but I'm showing you the way that I would approach it, and hopefully it's something that you can benefit from watching anyway. Maybe have a go, take on board some of these techniques, but don't feel that you can't just take on board what you want and then adapt them to suit your preference. So I'm just adding a bit more of the highlights to the top of some of these areas, maybe extending it across, having it join up over there. I've done too much white on that, I'll take some of that back off. See, I'm not happy with this white area up there now, it doesn't look quite right, so I'm just selecting by pressing and holding a nearby colour and then knock it back. So we've got maybe a small element of it, but nothing like as much as it was just a bit too glaring. Again, I can go back to the brightest blue and maybe I can just tie that in a little bit more, adding a bit more subtle broken dots. Now, sometimes when you watch a tutorial, you might be given the mistaken impression that it's all about technique, it's all about the brushes, it's all about the way you approach it. But in actuality, a lot of what art is the ability to see what you're creating and amend it as necessary. So it's the eye that is important more than anything else. You can have all the training and techniques in the world, but unless you've developed the eye to actually see what needs doing and where it needs putting, then all the techniques in the world are not going to get you very far. So once you've seen some techniques that you understand and you think you could have a go at working with, it really is then about putting the time in, getting familiar with the subject matter so that your eye can see what looks right and what doesn't look right. Okay, so I'm going to leave that prominent feature as it is for now. I'm going to move around some of the other features on the horizon, start adding in some snow details and a little bit more texture. So we have things in the distance that need more snow. I'll just break this up. The snow is going perhaps a little bit further up in areas. I can move across to the other side, maybe have some broken snow here. Again, think about the kind of the movement, the swing of the snow there, and maybe apply just a hint of that in the distance too. Maybe I can go to my green, start adding in a sense that there's some of that green colour or things growing there along the horizon line at the base. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to flatten those two layers by pinching them together. I'm going to slide it across, duplicate it, go to my transform tool, I'm going to flip it vertically and drag it down. So this is going to form the basis of the reflection, so something like that. And already, without doing too much more, you've already got a sense of illusion there. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my adjustments, I'm going to use the motion blur and just start having a little bit of an experiment there. You don't want to do it too far, the water's going to look like some kind of storm, it's going to look unrealistic, but you don't want it as a crystal clear reflection, so just a little bit of a sense of agitation to take away the absolute pristine reflection is going to assist you. Now some of this is going to be done more manually as well, but that right from the outset is going to give you a sense that there's something a bit different about what you see it down here as opposed to above. So we're just going to create another layer, and using the kind of lighter blues, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create kind of a broken surface along this point. So in the distance where it joins there, you're probably going to get it more joined up. I'm going to turn the size of the brush down a little bit, but I want to start bringing in a sense that it's perhaps more stripes, more broken. Now the point of this scene is it's kind of like frozen water. Well, not totally frozen, but we're in an icy environment. Obviously we've got the snow on the mountains, but the water itself is going to have floating bits of ice. Really want to exaggerate the sense of it being a really a cold environment. So I'm just creating a little bit of a surface, ice and snow. So we've not got really any movement in the water, it is pretty much still, which is why this area is going to be like a crystal clear reflection of what we've got above, apart from maybe a slight ripple. But for the bits nearer the horizon, we're going to have maybe a settlement of little lumps of ice. So although I'm doing sweeping motion across, I'm actually, if you can hear, I'm keeping it as a kind of very broken textural element too. So I'm going from left to right, but I'm doing it in like small dashes. You want to keep now I'm not pressing on too much, so it's a balance between not pressing on very hard, and perhaps you could turn the opacity down a little bit as well, it would perhaps help. And as we continue to bring this closer to you, or I guess if it was a photograph it would be the camera, we can increase the amount of spaces between these blobs and these ice objects. So it's going to appear more and more broken as it gets closer to you. I'm being very careful to try and preserve this sense of direction. It's easy to go off at different angles, it's not going to work. And if you do too long a line as well, the dash, then it's also not going to work. That won't work at all. You really have to try and preserve that sense of the horizon and the direction. And you don't want, in this instance, long dashes. You just want very broken, short marks, just to create a real sense of texture there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to have it stopping quite sharply actually. So I've decided that I want to bring it to about here, and then I want it to stop. I'm going to keep increasing the density of these dashes. So I don't really want any of that mountain, or not much of it, to show through here. I don't want it to be reflected in this area. not hardly at all anyway. I mean, some of the marks that I've been adding may well be joining up quite considerably at this point. Doesn't matter. I think it's better to do it slowly, because if you just did it as a flat thing, it's really going to look dead. You want as much kind of texture and change and variety in there as you can get. Now, I'm doing it relatively quick for the benefit of the video, but you could take your time over this. If you wanted to get those dashes quite evenly spaced, then go for it. Now, as well as that, I'm going to move to a slightly darker colour, and I'm going to do the same thing into these areas where actually it's quite a light reflection, but I want to just darken it up here a little bit. Turn the opacity down though a little bit. Again, try and preserve the direction. And over here too. Okay, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to switch to my real bright colours. So I'm going to have white and I'm going to have the lightest blue. So I'll go with the white to begin with, and there's going to be some bigger features there. So I'm going to turn the opacity up. There's going to be some bigger floating features on the water that are really going to stand out. So bigger features here as well. Have them crossing over the edges, because if you did them, I don't know, if you just had them there so they didn't make contact with the reflection, didn't interrupt that, then it's going to have less of a power, less of an impact. So have it crossing over and disrupting, have it broken. You can have sections maybe that get bigger as they get closer to the camera. Doesn't always have to be the case, but add a bit of variety anyway. Now, if you're going to have a big feature, I'll do an example here, and you're going to perhaps need to include a shadow side to it as well. But if it's a big enough feature, then chances are you're probably going to have to do a reflection to it as well. So you'll need to do some sense that it has a shadow version, or a reflected version rather. So I've done the top half, now I need to show the underneath of it as well, the reflected part. Maybe in the center create dark blue colour, just to show there's a division between the two. I'm going to turn the size of the brush up. I want a real, maybe a big artifact here in the water, something nice and substantial, more foreground feature. I'm going to keep it quite flat, but I want it to really sort of cut into the scene. So again, some more debris. It's going to look a bit flat over here, a bit featureless, so keep adding some noise, some things to disrupt. And you'll notice that I've got a very flat, a very featureless sky as of yet. So I'm going to go and fix that. So I'm going to create another layer. I'm going to put it behind everything apart from the original two layers. So they're the original two layers. I'm putting it above those, but behind everything else. Now for the clouds, I'm going to go to the two lightest colours. I'll start with the lightest blue. I'm going to move to an airbrush, a soft brush rather, turn the opacity down, and I just want to create a soft sense of some clouds in the sky. Now I really want to bring the focus into the center area, so I'm going to have it perhaps sort of pointing towards that almost. Now if you go straight at this with a high opacity, then it's going to look really bad. You need it on a soft airbrush and you need the opacity really very, very low to begin with. Otherwise it's not going to work at all. It's not going to create the right effect. You really need to do things gradually if you want to create that sense of realism. So it's not going to be all totally straight lines, but there is going to be a general direction towards the center feature there. Maybe more of a sense of a band along the horizon as well. So I'm not going to do too much cloud though. Maybe some, as well as those general sweeping motions, we could have some blobs. Now this is a layer underneath the mountain range, so I can really go right up to the edge. I'm not going to have any issue with it creating a problem of that mountain edge. If you want to add some maybe sharper edges here and there, you can do that. Reduce the size of the brush, really sharpen up some of the lines there if you want to. Maybe some sort of squiggles here and there, so you don't want it to be totally straight lined, maybe. Keep it quite loose. Now I feel like I've got lines coming in here, lines coming in there. I want to slightly decrease that conflict So I'm just going to add some more kind of blobs and diagonals into this section here, just to sort of bring them together a little bit more, so they're not fighting against each other to quite the same extent. If you decide you've done too much of it, you can always go onto the eraser. Again, go for the soft airbrush though, turn the opacity down somewhat, and you can create broken areas here. Just be tentative perhaps, not too much. You can always add some more breaks in the cloud if you feel like it's all clumped together a little bit too much. I'm generally quite happy with the effect. I think because the rest of the image gives an illusion, then the sky almost, well, doesn't need a lot of worrying about really. So that will do for the sky. I'm going to duplicate that layer, just the same as I did before. Use the transform tool, flip it vertically and bring it down so it reflects in the water. Now, you'll see it doesn't quite fit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select it again, flip it vertically and maybe stretch it to fill. But I don't want that layer to be quite as exaggerated, so I'm going to turn the opacity down on it. So it's still there, but it's nothing like as bright as the original. So I'm going to turn the opacity of that way down. So it's still essentially reflecting everything that is there, but it's nothing like as bright as the original top area of the sky. Now, another thing you can do on the reflected part there is to go onto the smudge tool, go onto a medium airbrush, turn the size of it down and the opacity down, and you can really help sell the illusion. If I zoom in a bit more, you can break up that edge a little bit. You can really create a sense that there's perhaps more of disturbance in the water, so you've not got quite the clean edge. It's gone fuzzy, but you're going to get slightly a more broken kind of rippled look. I think that's going to create a slightly more realistic look to the water, so you can just move backwards and forwards really. In terms of selling the illusion, that's generally about it. I'm going to just spend a little bit of time working on some of the details. So I'm going to, again, use some of my other blues. Now, you can sort of swap and change between the different blues, but essentially, I'm going to use some of the slightly darker blues to just create a sense that maybe these forms that are floating are not entirely flat, because they're not going to be entirely flat. They're going to have mass. The fact that they're floating is because, you know, there's a quantity of it, so they will cling together, have mass, have a shadow, as well as having a reflection too. Just going to go back to that layer. I feel like I just want to darken it up slightly compared to the top half there. Maybe desaturate it just a little bit as well. So mixture of darkening and desaturating. I feel that makes the difference. That kind of separates the top half from the bottom half, gives it a sense that it's more water really than compared to the rest. Okay, so I'm going to leave it there for this particular tutorial. Do check out my hexadecimal color codes in the description. There's a link for my Patreon page if you want to download that as a file. Make sure to subscribe to my channel, check out my other videos. I hope this has been beneficial. I hope this has been educational for you as well as entertaining, and I'll catch you back here again. See you soon.